Chi's accomplishments as the CEO of the Global Environment Facility. I actually believe the entire Jeff family is on this 2,000-person webinar today to honor her 8-year term. So Naoko and I will start with a short conversation of this time since 2012, and what a different time that was when you arrived, Naoko. We barely had the Aichi targets. We were building up to the Paris Climate Accord, to the Minamata Convention, and to land degradation neutrality. During Naoko's tenure, our understanding of the state of the environment has improved and reinforced that the problems of land degradation and climate change and biodiversity loss and ocean pollution and their impact on human health and livelihoods were inextricably linked. And that to tackle them in time, transformational change was needed. And so, undaunted, Naoko took on transformational change. And we're going to hear about this journey. And following that conversation, Andrew Steer, the president and CEO of the World Resources Institute, will lead an amazing set of leaders in sustainability in a dialogue. Then Naoko and the incoming Jeff CEO, Minister Carlos Manuel Rodriguez of Costa Rica, will converse. And finally, all of you will have a chance to ask questions. So please, during the course of these discussions, use the chat box and enter your questions as you think of them, and we'll get to as many as we can in the final segment of the webinar. Now, those of you who have watched my many council presentations know that I usually highlight a wonder of nature, some exciting, magnificent creature on this planet. And today, we should celebrate Naoko Ishii as a wonder of nature for her vision of transformation and for her science-based leadership. It has been so exciting for staff to partner with her on this transition, on working on integration across the environmental treaties, on climate risk screening, on multi-stakeholder dialogues, on knowledge management, on advancing indigenous populations, and gender equity. And then, what an adventure to work with you, Naoko, on the integrated approach pilots and the impact programs, which were really very daring and stretch across regions and across sectoral boundaries. Throughout all this, Naoko has always argued that nature-based solutions are crucial to healing the rift between the environment and humans. And in your last council meeting, Naoko, you highlighted that nature-based solutions can help with COVID-19, with future pandemics, with climate change, and building resilience to extreme events that are as yet unanticipated. Well, so there's so much to talk about, so we should hear from you. Naoko, some would think that my first question is very simple, but given the breadth and depth of your experience and your accomplishments, which by the way are brilliantly summarized in this 33-page document, which I commend to all. So what would you say is the one thing you are most proud of, your greatest achievement as CEO?
Thank you, Rosina, for a great question. Thank you so much for doing this for me and for the Jeff. I just would also like to thank the panelists and the moderators, interviewers, but also everyone who joined this webinar event, because this is such a special moment for me. So going back to your question, Rosina, what would be my biggest accomplishment, what I'm proud of? I think that that would be to disrupt the existing system, particularly the existing system of the way Jeff works. That how we allocate resources, how we come up with a project, and how we engage with partners. So, and let me tell you why I said that. 8 years ago, when I joined the Jeff, I got 2 shocks. The first one was that I realized relatedly we were in environmental crisis. We were so close to fall from the edge or the cliff, and we were almost breaching the planetary boundaries. So that's the first shock. But the second shock is bigger than the first one. That is why I didn't know all of those environmental crisis, environmental situation when I worked with the Ministry of Finance, which I came from. I have to confess that we really didn't discuss the environment. And when we do the budget, that annual budget, or when we come up with that long-term investment and planning, the environment was not there. So when that Ministry of Finance people or the big money people make an important decision, environment is not really incorporated in those decision making, and it seems almost two worlds apart, and just living different lives. And that was my second shock, and that really made me think how we could the fact would be the role of the Jeff in that two parts apart, two worlds apart. There was also the bit of the paradox when I came to Jeff. That we were very proud that we are operating 2 decades and 2,700 projects at the $9 billion, and 80% of the projects are rated satisfactory. So there is a lot of good story about the Jeff. But when we think about the environment got worse and worse day by day. So something really didn't add up. That made me really think that how the Jeff can shift the needle and to make some kind of contribution to arrest this environmental degradation, the spiral of degradation, to bring us back on track. That made me think, and made us, the Jeff, think that how we can really change the trajectory. That the exercise actually that leads to Jeff 2020, the first ever actually that the long-term strategy of the Jeff. That's a background, how we started this journey.
Oh my goodness, I mean, that certainly sounds like an incredibly steep learning curve and steep education in those first few months. So what did your recognition of, as you said, those initial shocks and paradoxes lead to?
Yeah, no, actually we convened that some team, that internal, external, to really make this soul searching. And we actually in 1 or 2 years, we came up this story, actually the strategy, we summarize it in the Jeff 2020, and it has 4 or 5 important principles in it. And I very quickly go one by one. The one, we would like to have more driver-focused approach rather than just doing the environmental degradation, the symptom or the consequences of the degradation. We want to focus the driver of environmental degradation because we believe that is much more impactful. The second principle is that integration. Rosina, we worked very closely how we integrate our business line because we tended to operate much more fragmented silo way, like a climate project, biodiversity project, a land project. But we need to integrate our business line because that the challenge on the ground are already integrated. So we need to respond to that ground challenge. Third one, which I feel really important, is the system transformation. That when I realized from the science, I think that Johan really educated me quite well. That when I realized that we were so close to the boundaries, and then that we are the first generation to really to alter the function of the Earth's nature system, which we all rely on. That the only way for us to prosper within the boundary is system change. So how we could really do that to transform the key economic system. So that is the third component, that the principle. It leads to me that the fourth component, which is a multi-stakeholder platform, multi-stakeholder coalition, because no single entity can do the system transformation. So that then that we need to really work with partners so that we can flip the system that jointly, and with that kind of understanding of the 4 principles, as Rosina, you already mentioned, we come up several the kind of feature that flagship projects like an integrated approach pilot and impact program. We worked very closely with the food system people. I'm very grateful that Agnes is there and today joined as a panelist. Hope that the Paul Polman can also join, because we team up with the Food and Land Use Coalition very closely, that so that we can make this food system, which is the largest threat to the environment, to make it much more sustainable. That I work with several, actually the mayors, the city people, because city are at the front line of the fighting against the climate change. We want to do much more business with the cities more directly. So we have this sustainable city program. If Vera is able to join that, we have also the city program in Dakar, and we work very closely with the mayors too. Then that two more quick example, Amazon, the Congo Basin, that those big key biomes of globally significant, but we really need to team up with from top ministers to the governors and actually the communities together to really bring this second generation, the second of the Amazon, for instance. I'm sure Isabella will talk a lot about it. Then last but not least, the circular economy, how we can really make the current linear make waste economy model to much more circular, so that I think that Dominic hosts this PACE and the platform accelerating circular economy, and we try to do that, the plastic, we try to do electronics, we try to do the fashion, but the entire point is that we need to really move out of the single fragmented projects to project approach to take the system as a space. Then we need to bring up all the key actors to flip the system. So that was the challenge, and that was our journey for the last 8 years. I would say that jury is still out there to assess that the impact is this new way, more impactful, but at least we have tried, and we see some very good initial sign of that behavioral change. So back to you, Rosina.
Well, yeah, systems change is really hard, but it's absolutely necessary. And as you say, it requires from the top down and the bottom up and all actors to be participants. So another not so easy question, what is the unfinished agenda of the GEF?
Well, unfinished agenda is, I didn't really disrupt enough. I think that we have made a lot of disruption to our own GEF system and the way we worked, but when we look at the ground reality in this the economic system, we were not yet close to the tipping points. Yes, we have made a lot of good progress and with partners to flip the system. That I think I believe that we have made to got over that some of the tipping points, but still that there are a lot of systems to be flipped, and then we need to really bring ourselves much closer to the tipping points. We try to use the GEF resources very strategically because we are very unique. It's a grant making the institution, so we try to use the GEF to bond people, bond partners, to provide the capacity building, to strengthen the weakest link of the value chain, the supply chain. Sometimes we use the GEF resources to de-risk that private capital, but it's such a hard work to flip the system. But as you said, Rosina, COVID-19 will give us, I believe it's a chance, because in my view, COVID-19 is a collision between human economic system and the natural system. We brought ourselves too close to the integrity of the nature, so that if I understand this correctly, the fundamental solution to COVID-19 is how to accelerate our system transformation. And I believe that there is a kind of willingness in there among the people, because all of us come to know that business as usual wouldn't work. So there will be a willingness to disrupt, to embrace the disruption. So that a lot to be done, but back to you, Rosina.
Thank you, Tayoko, for this amazing journey you've taken the GEF family on, and for your legacy of lasting achievement and friendship. And I am so delighted that you will be a professor at the University of Tokyo and will head up a new center on the Global Commons as its inaugural lead. And you will also be a vice president of the university. And so congratulations to you, but equal congratulations to the legions of students who you will train to follow in your legacy. It's wonderful news. So we have so much more to discuss. Let me now turn you over to Andrew Steer, the CEO and president of the World Resources Institute, to ask our distinguished panel of leaders about their views of the past, present, and future. Andrew, over to you.
Great, thank you, Rosina. Thank you, Naoko. What a pleasure it is to be here, and how great to see so many people online celebrating this transition in the GEF. And what a remarkable journey it has been. And certainly for the World Resources Institute that I have the privilege of working for, it's been a wonderful relationship with the GEF since the very beginning. We're proud to have actually written the original paper recommending the GEF, and my goodness me, that was work worth doing. And so look at us now, wonderful. We have an astonishing panel that we're going to have a conversation with. I wonder if you would all turn your cameras on now. I wanted to turn first to Agnes Kalibata, simply because Agnes, I know, has to rush off because there's also the high-level political forum today, and she has to give a keynote there. And so thank you for joining us, Agnes. So we'll allow you to slip out after your comments, and then we're going to have a conversation with all the other panelists. I hope everybody knows Agnes, a very remarkable person, head of AGRA, the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. Before that, she was Rwanda's Minister of Agriculture. She started life as a refugee in Uganda. Her parents were smallholders, got her PhD in agronomy, and great. He's now the special envoy for next year's Food Summit. So Agnes, you've worked with the GEF a lot, both as minister and head of AGRA. As you look back over the last 8 years and you look forward, share your thoughts.
Thank you, Andrew. And I didn't know you knew so much about me, so it's refreshing to know that you've been following me. Now, Naoko, it's really been an amazing journey knowing you, but I wanted to disagree with you on where you said you felt like you haven't disrupted enough. And I'm just going to give you a few examples of where I think that all of us judge ourselves harshly sometimes. We wish we could do more, but I think you've done a huge amount of work. Now, like Andrew says, I started off working with government. From a government perspective, I knew GEF as some form of auditor. You come to tell us what to do. Not friendly, not user-friendly in any way, but just tell, don't do this, don't do that. So that was my perception of what GEF was supposed to do. We have a major program, you're trying to get work done, and their job is to stand in your way and make it difficult for you to do your work. That was my sense. So when I came here to AGRA, and we started working together, and I met you, I completely, excuse me, I completely had an opportunity to shift my perception of GEF. Little did I know that you actually, as a person, had so much to do with the shift that I was seeing. And I'll tell you 3 things that struck me from the shift that I saw. One of the things that you see at country level is the fact that the conversation within agriculture and within environment is just not happening. The environment feels their job is to protect the environment. They actually forget that agriculture is the biggest user of the environment. And really, I've seen that come together under your leadership, and I'll talk about it in a second. The second thing was recognizing the centrality of farmers as custodians of our environment and giving them an opportunity to have a say in the work that we are doing, being led by GEF. The third thing is pushing for policies for this part of the conversation to become part of the policies around food systems, really pushing for an early thought process around how we integrate the production, consumption, and use of food. So that all these are things that I've seen play out in the work we are doing with GEF in AGRA. in the areas we are working across Eastern, Southern, and Western Africa that we are looking to scale out soon. We've seen smallholder farmers intensify production and produce more and stop cutting forests. Right now, in Kenya, we are sitting at the edge of Kakamega Forest, but these farmers are no longer cutting it, whether it is for firewood or for agriculture. And this is because of the work that we are doing. They're actually doing so much more because they are selling, they have markets. And this is thanks to the work we've been doing with GEF. We are seeing government sitting, at least here from a local government perspective, sitting and having a conversation around how to integrate farmers into their conversations, how to ask for their opinion. This is new, how to ask for their opinion around the type of investments that should be made in their area. So that's why I'm saying that. I mean, I could go on, but I know that time is limited. But really, I want to say two things, that you should be extremely proud of, that I will remember you by. One, you recognize that farmers are custodians of our environment. They are not beneficiaries. They are not people that we must support. They are not smallholders. They are not subsistence people. They are custodians of our environment, and we need to equip them. And really, that thought process comes out very clear in the work we've been doing with GEF. You also recognize that no single institution will deliver this. I mean, you said it, but people might say, yeah, you can say that, but I've lived it. I work with you, I've worked with you on the ground. So the approach you've brought to the work that we are doing is really recognizing that no single institution can do it. And that's huge, because that removes all the siloing and work in different places. Third, you believe in partnerships. I really want to thank you for the work you've been doing with us to take AGRF further. I hope that because of all that, you see an opportunity to work with us in the Food Systems Summit as we go into the Food Systems Summit, and that you'll be a champion even as you go back into Japan, into universities, and into all sorts of places, that you can be a champion for the Food Systems Summit as it starts rolling out. So I'll stop there. I hope I haven't taken more than my time, but I just felt like it was very exciting, and I wanted to express my appreciation of the work you've done. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Agnes, very much indeed. And I'm sure all of us and everyone online wants to support you as we head towards next year's Food Summit. So we are at your service. What wonderful words. I'm now going to turn briefly to each of the other panelists. I'd like to start maybe with Johan Rockström. Let's start with the science. Johan, as you know, is head of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research. He founded the Stockholm Resilience Center. One of the leading scientists. He's the person, of course, that created the whole idea of planetary boundaries. And very early on, I remember, Johan, when Naoko arrived, you addressed the council of the GEF and really sort of rang the bell on how urgent things were. As you now look back at that 8-year period, are you more optimistic? Are you more pessimistic? And moving forward, where should we be? And what I'm going to ask the panelists to do is to be fairly brief so that we can then have a conversation and lots of follow-up. And maybe after Johan, I turn to Vera Songway.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. But let me just start following on Agnes here. I mean, you're right. Naoko called upon me very early in your tenure, Naoko, to address the council. And if, as Agnes says, you're a planetary custodian, I would say you're also a planetary seducer, because you don't say no to Naoko. So when Naoko calls, you come, and it was really worth the time. And that was a moment where, for the first time, I, as a scientist, and I would say also as the global sustainability science community, felt that the GEF was moving from, let's say, a place-based ecosystem community-oriented entity to really connecting the broad systems understanding of how to navigate the Anthropocene, and really thinking about a safe and just operating space for all citizens on Earth. So I was incredibly, energized by that opportunity. And yes, I think, Andrew, that the challenges are still there. We know we're still moving on aggregate in the wrong direction, but things are falling into place. And I think what the GEF and your leadership, Naoko, has really tipped the scales on is the new narrative, that we are turning a corner on the new story that sustainability, as Agnes points out, is not about protecting nature. It's about being custodians of human well-being and equity for the future. And I think plugging in the Earth system science, the planetary boundaries, the tipping point recognition about systemic risks and transformational agendas, I think is what you have really contributed with. And I would say there's no return from that point, actually. The transformations agenda is with us now, and you should have a big thank for having, you know, kind of being the team leader along that journey.
Thank you very much, Johan. That was to the point. So we'll come back to you very soon, actually, if we may. I'd like to turn to Vera Songway. I think you're on the line, Vera. If you can turn on your camera, that would be terrific. Vera is the head of the Economic Commission for Africa, an Undersecretary General at the United Nations. She, before that, was a regional director at the International Finance Corporation and a director at the World Bank. And in her current role, she is doing remarkable things, integrating issues of sustainability with the long-term development of Africa. Vera, a few words from you. Vera, we can't hear you. I tell you what, we'll come back to Vera in a little while. And let's go to Paul Pullman. It's wonderful to have you on the line, Paul. And behind you is the logo of your new organization, Imagine, which is a truly inspiring initiative to bring to the corporate sector in particular a sort of entirely new way of doing business. And I'm sure Paul will share a little bit about that. Paul, of course, was the iconic CEO of Unilever, and has probably done more than any corporate leader in the world, I think, to raise the issue of sustainability on the political agenda. Paul, you've worked with Naoko for a long time. What's on your mind?
Well, we're here for Naoko, and I didn't want to miss this for anything. I'm actually on holiday with the grandchildren, but this is more important to me. So I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you have done, and I really mean it. When you started, it wasn't so obvious that biodiversity, climate, deforestation, that they were all one thing. Now everybody talks with COVID about, you know, that we can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. But you, I think, were the first one who advocated that and raised your voice and actually came with very, very strong science-based solutions, as Johan has pointed out. And we're grateful for that. What seems so obvious now was hard work. But as we see in the various conferences that we've been in, the dialogues, the Zooms that we have now, we are moving very fast on nature-based solutions, and you should take great credit for that. The second thing that takes courage in an organization like the one you are leading is to actually bring business to the center of the conversations and to work these partnerships. You've been very modest in your report that you say we need to do more, and that's always the case, but you've done an awful lot. We would not have had Business for Nature, as Dominique will undoubtedly start talking about, were it not for you. The coalitions that we formed around stopping the deforestation, a lot of work to do still, but I'm proud to see that a country like Indonesia is down in deforestation for 3 years in a row, and you should take a lot of credit for that. And there are many other platforms that you've actually been part of, the Tropical Forest Alliance, the Food and Land Use, or the Folur now, and many of the other things, actually too many to mention. And the last one being the fashion one. We just had a call this morning, you might be happy to hear. We have now 68 companies moving quite fast forward on getting to regenerative cotton and sticking to the climate agreements, net zero by 2050. But all these things are only possible because of yourself. But I like you as a person more because despite the challenges to deal with these things, you've always done it with a smile. You've always been constructive. You've always rallied everybody else around you. And now you're doing the same thing, even with your successor, with Carlos Manuel, which is a great sign of leadership that you have such a great leader from Costa Rica following you, who has greened the country, who has reforested, who has driven ecotourism. And we can only say that thanks to the seeds that you have planted, he will definitely sit under the shadows of the trees that are growing now. And we really want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Paul, so much. That was wonderful. Thank you. Let's turn to Isabella Teixeira, a wonderful Minister of Environment in Brazil, who led the delegation to the Paris Climate Accord, who during her tenure, amazing things happened to the forests of Brazil, reducing deforestation, creating an entire plan for restoration as well. Isabella is now co-chair of the International Resource Panel of the United Nations. Isabella, as minister, you dealt with NAOCO a lot, and you dealt with the Jeff. What's in your mind?
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. First of all, good morning from Brazil. Okay, and it's so amazing to have the opportunity to see my friends again, Paul, you, NAOCO, and welcome the new CEO, Jeff CEO. Good luck, and don't forget to enjoy, as always, NAOCO taught us. I remember the first time that I met her, and it was Nairobi, and she asked for a bilateral meeting. And I remember that I hosted, and it was so impressive because I mentioned, wow, we have a former Minister of Finance that is looking forward to be on board on biodiversity agenda. Come on, we need to support this woman. I remember this, it was also as I was beginning as a minister, but I remember that I used to talk to NAOCO about our strategy here in Brazil, not only to tackle deforestation and exactly with her support, and consider ARPA program the most important protected areas program in the world. Jeff comes closer and more than this, support us. And today you have probably, you have our good outcomes, not only for protect our 6 million of hectares under protection in Amazon region, but we also have other sons from this, considering initiatives in Colombia and also in Peru, that it's an outcome, positive outcome based on our experience and as Jeff as a strategic partner. And it's also part of a new initiative in Brazil, and I remember that she fully discussed, because the science-based oriented, but also it's an innovative way to bring Amazon sustainable landscape, a new concept, how we can indeed work together with other countries. In Brazil reached around $6 million of investments from Jeff. And of course, we had also should learn how to manage better our funds and to add additional funds from Brazilian government exactly to make our intentions more robust. And also in marine ecosystem, NAOCO, your initiative today in Brazil, you have 26% of the marine ecosystem is now economic exclusive zoning under protection. When we approved the Jeff Marine first phase, it was only 1.5% of the under protection. Today is 26% under protection. You are negotiating the second phase. So this is one good example how this charming and amazing Japanese woman came to discuss and to prove that connections are so important, partnerships are so important, and to need to have an open-minded approach, considering how we can, in a developing economy like Brazil, a huge economy like Brazil, we can need to bring partners, different players together, and understand the difference that we have amongst different biomes and different dynamics, not only economic ones, but social ones. And she is very sensitive, considering social agenda, inequalities, indigenous people, and how we can bring these issues together with new political and economic and social narratives. I would like to really thank you very much for your engagement. You also had the opportunity to have accreditation of Brazilian Biodiversity Fund as an implementing agency. This was very innovative from NGOs, from the civil society in Brazil, and also benefit sharings, genetic source funds, projects to support ABS. And this is a good news because yesterday, Brazil finally, the National Congress approved the ratification of Nagoya Protocol, and Brazil is back. This is very good news, and we are part of this. So what I can say is she's, as Paul mentioned, she's a really, really a provocative woman. She likes to provoke us. And Juan, don't forget to provoke the world. We need to be provoked to move on. And also, I like too much, as Johan mentioned, the ecosystem community oriented. We need to indeed move on and understand how we can bring these countries together, also understand better the national development requirement, and probably my first suggestion that you can address better the global south, probably a green global south. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isabella. That was wonderful. You had up close links with Naoko. By the way, I'm looking at some of the questions and answers, and there's plenty of them that are coming in, and many of them are saying nice things about Naoko. I'm just looking at one now from Patricia Zarita, who's CEO of BirdLife. Congratulations, Naoko, on 8 years of disruption. Thank you for creating multi-country programs, but why didn't you do more to get rid of the star allocation system? so there are some good suggestions in here too. Let's see, Dominic Worry. Great to have you here, Dominic. Dominic is the managing director and sits on the highest management board of the World Economic Forum. Dominic, one of Naoko's principles that she talked about and is in that wonderful document, which I hope everybody has seen, Delivering Transformative Change the last decade. She talks about the importance of coalitions, and in many ways, you've literally almost written the book on that. Dominic, for those who don't know, arrived at the World Economic Forum when, quite frankly, issues of sustainability weren't very high on the agenda. Now they are extremely high, and Dominic deserves a great deal of thanks for us and bringing together these multi-stakeholder coalitions, the corporate sector, the government, civil society, science, and so on. Dominic, say a word about that and your links with the GEF.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'm just completely delighted and honoured to join this panel. I've actually kind of avoided my own chairman and a big speech he's giving to our house to be here. So I couldn't miss it for the world. So just a big thank you for that. It's also just a delight to be surrounded on this panel with such esteemed kind of folks. You know, the science-based work that Johan has driven, Paul with all the multiple hats, not only as CEO of Unilever, chair of the Business Council for Sustainable Development, chair of the International Chamber of Commerce, co-chair of a Global Compact, Andrew and all that you've done at WRI, Isabella, you mentioned the brilliant stuff in Brazil, and also, may I say so, to reinvent the IRP, the International Resource Panel, and drive that forward, and Agnes, who we've mentioned now, is that it's just terrific. So I feel like I'll sneak in at the back and say a few words, but Naoko, just you know, this process of not only changing an agenda but shifting institutions, I think it just cannot be underestimated. And I know that, you know, I've cried on your shoulder many times about how did you do that in the GF and what tips have you got? And you've just been phenomenal at being dogged and determined and focused and systems change and coalitions and tipping points, and we cannot go back to the way we were before, and that's what we're going to do. And I think it's just been inspirational to be part of the journey that you have taken us all on that process. I particularly remember a moment in 2018. You've been on so many Davos panels and so many other events and watching you, but September 2018, which is a little bit before the GEF replenishment, it was just after the California Climate Action Summit. Johan, you were on the same bit. We had Al Gore and yourself doing some talks. Paul, Andrew, you've just been on before. And everyone was sort of talking about, you know, maybe there's something coming up the California Climate Action Summit. Is there not? And we were pre that moment where nature and climate, biodiversity and cities food had all joined together. We were just pre that, and we had sort of tribes, if you like, coming to the agenda. You were on that panel and you blew the audience away because you talked about the need for systems change. You talked about not just projects, but also systems thinking, that one didn't just need protocols, one needed partnerships and coalitions, one needed new kinds of actors to come in. You set it all out, And you said it in the process of, that's what we're going to do with the replenishment. That's what I'm taking to the people who are going to put the money into the biggest organization that we have to protect our global commons. You did it much better than I did. It was brilliant. And I can tell you, you had 600-700 people in that plenary room walk out going, oh, the Global Environment Facility. Oh my goodness, what's that about? And these are people who are not in the environment space. These are business, finance, other leaders, journalists doing this. You had about 200,000 people watching you on live stream. And I cannot tell you how brilliant it was. It was just fantastic. So it's an absolute delight and honor to be here. And I have to say as well that just the best thing ever is, as you go off to Tokyo University to drive that agenda forward, we couldn't be more excited to have Carlos Manuel Rodriguez taking on the role. This is just fabulous. Several business leaders, I think Paul, you've drummed this into me over the years, is it's not about you, it's about who you get around you and to follow you and to drive that agenda forward and take it all forward. So the sign of the leadership is now we're kind of welcoming Carlos to the role. We're all terribly excited by that. And Nako, just a massive thank you on behalf of all the stakeholders out there for what you've achieved. It is unbelievably tremendous. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dominic. I'm delighted now to see Vera here. Welcome, Vera. I don't know whether you were here when I introduced you before, but I was saying that you have a game-changing role right now in what you're doing as head of the Economic Commission for Africa, and I know you've worked with Naoko and the Jeff. Would love you to share any thoughts you have.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And I really did want to be here, Naoko. And we're in Ethiopia now and we're facing some challenges. So I left my house rushing here, and of course I can't connect in between, but really, really happy to be here and to see everybody. I think we've done a lot of work with Naoko from Sri Lanka at a time when we were doing fragility and trying to get the transition together, to all the fantastic work on cities. I don't know if we've spoken about that in Senegal, and I think that she was one of the people with the Jeff that was able to, you know, when we have this new and innovative ideas, normally they always start sort of at the national level and we're running after federal governments. But I think going down to the city level where a lot of this happens, and you know, we know now that waste management is a huge, huge and important part of the whole sort of sustainability agenda. But for us, and in particularly in Dakar, it was also two things. It was jobs and it was revenue. And I think that combination, usually when we talk about the sustainability agenda, we don't really bring in, you know, the sort of benefit. We go in and we talk about climate change and we preach this conversations that those who are at the bottom, using UN speak, you know, those who risk to be left behind don't understand and don't really care because they are trying to get their next meal. But when you come into the sustainability and environment conversation around, this is a revenue earning sustainable means of sort of, this is really the doing well, we're doing better. And I see that Paul is here too. And so I think really it started a momentum among African mayors that I don't think we had before. And there's always been that conversation, of course, because of the sort of the revenue, you know, should this kind of revenue be a central government revenue or a local government revenue, and what's, you know, what role cities should play. And again, I think there was another innovation that Naoko was able to bring to the table with her team, because yes, it was a team effort, was to sort of say, you know, we can actually begin to look at fiscal decentralization around getting local revenue for states that want to and positively embark on sustainability in that sense. So it was really amazing. And I mean, Dakar for a long time with our mayor did amazing things, Naoko. We have new mayors, and I think that hopefully we have just started at the ECA some work on, you know, the local reviews. You know, sort of started the voluntary national reviews at the UN as well, to sort of see how countries will put in place their sustainability agendas, but also embark on the Agenda 2030. And we thought, and a little bit from the ideas of Dakar, why don't we do local voluntary reviews and embed some of this SDG agenda in it? And amazingly, when we did it with the first one in Zimbabwe, we had 15 mayors that put their hands up. A lot of them mayors that we had met already and we're working with. And so unfortunately we have COVID because we were going to showcase them at the high level political forum. But we hope that with everybody that is on this panel, we can continue that conversation of, you know, sustainability, the environment, jobs and revenue. I think when you have that sort of virtuous cycle, it really becomes a no-brainer that, you know, and waste and, you know, tree planting in Ethiopia, the Prime Minister is about to plant 50 billion trees. We're going to launch a green innovation with him and in 2 weeks. But part of it is just greening cities. And the value of that, even for tourism of the cities, is quite amazing. So I think that, you know, you started something, hopefully where you are, you will be doing research that helps us to do more and better. And I hope that we can work together. And I don't know Carlos, but I want to welcome you, Carlos, and hope that we can continue these conversations and the collaboration with you as well. But thank you very much. Thanks, Andrew, for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera.
Thank you.
Thanks for all you're doing. It's really remarkable. You've been in your job now, I think, about 3 years, and thank you for what you're doing. It's really great. Now, we don't have long, but I'd like to just go around the panel and ask you a simple question. All of us now are thinking about what I know the World Economic Forum and Prince Charles calls the Great Reset. We all know that whilst we're very proud of what we've done, quite frankly, it's not yet adding up. In Naoko's piece, which do read, everybody, go to the event page for this event and download and read the last 10-year document. She makes a very interesting point. She said, you know, it's possible to have, you know, thousands of projects and 80% of them all successful, and yet not really move the needle. And one of the exciting things about what Naoko and the Jeff has done over the last 8 years is started to really move the needle. We need to move the needle in a much bigger way now. So my question to you, as we talk about the Great Reset in the sort of social contract between corporations and governments and citizens, what are you optimistic? And is there one or two things you feel are the absolute imperatives we must do? And you have 1 minute each. Let's start with Johan.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'd like to take off where Isabella Teixeira took us, reminding that Naoko is a deputy finance minister of Japan. I think that is one of the key entry points to really scale the success and turning point we have to get the narrative of how sustainability is the pathway to jobs, economy, equity, innovation, technology. And I think you've repositioned GF to not be anymore just the environmental institution for environmental ministers, but really be a player at the central stage of success and development and dealing with resilience in a recovery in this turbulent age we live in. And how can we together join forces even more strongly when we need to govern the global commons, we need to set science-based targets for business, for cities, for communities. And I think that to me is the Great Reset, to get that operational systems change that Naoko has been the ambassador for the last 8 years.
Perfect. Thank you. Isabella.
Thank you very much. I am a pragmatic optimist, okay? I learned in my experience that you need pragmatism. And I fully agree with Johan, and my feeling is that we are changing, not necessarily a disruptive process, but we are changing. And I think that Jeff must bring not only the experience from the past, but understand better what are the new dynamics that are coming. So we need to understand better how we can play innovating biodiversity governance in a decade of tipping points, and also how you can manage better the connective of risks. It's very important because the narrative, the political ones, the economic ones will bring this on board, and we must be in the center of the solutions, not only the center of the problems. So my first consideration, thank you.
Thank you so much. Vera, the subject is the Great Reset. I think you're muted, Vera.
You know, through no choice of our own, we are almost forced to do the Great Reset with this great recession and pandemic, I think that the question of a reset has almost become an imperative for us. And part of the reset, and I think, again, Naoko, is really beginning to think about, how do we build back better and how do we build back more sustainably? And I think that a lot of the work that you've been doing over the last 8 years now really has, a platform where we can scale it up. And my conversations with you now will be to make sure that we can quickly put it in there as people begin to get the stimulus packages. And now we're all struggling to do the sort of recovery strategies. Almost every country should be working with you to say, what component of that can I put into my Build Back Better strategy?
Terrific. Thank you, Vera, very much. Dominic, what exactly do you mean when you keep talking about the Great Reset?
Thank you, Andrew. It's exactly as has just been described, that the incredible impact of the COVID pandemic, not only the horrendous impact on mortality and morbidity, but also the economic impact it's had, effectively a global economy pretty much shutting down, combined with the absolutely untenable social divisions and inequality that it has shown can happen. Simple things like who has access to healthcare or information, or indeed an ability to have a job. So all of these things compound themselves in, we can't really kind of go back to how we were, given the explosion socially, economically, and environmentally that COVID has shown. So what is to be done? And the only way then is to think about how one resets some of those agendas. We can see that within the social movements which are demanding change, or in many parts of the world. We can see that in economists and macroeconomic thinking. We can see that in the sustainability and environmental movement. But you have to bring those together. So it cannot be 3 or 4 different resets. It has to be integrated, which is the systems change that NICO has championed so strongly. So that's the Great Reset. You asked me if I'm optimistic. I think I'll use a phrase which our friend David Nabarro uses a lot. I'm a stropist. We know we have the right strategy for systems change, and actually there's a window of opportunity because we have to build back in a different way. There are 2 areas I think that we could focus on enormously when there's such limited fiscal headroom and overseas development budgets are being squeezed more and more. The potential of nature-based solutions and the flows of finance from the industrial sector into ecosystem restoration is a huge opportunity if we get that right, and maybe build an architecture which is sort of outside of some of the pre-existing things that have kept prices very low, but a proper flow of finance in the right way for livelihoods and jobs. That's the second thing, is the social bit. If you think about how companies talk about E, S, and G, we cannot, in the sustainability community, only focus on the E. Jobs, 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 inclusion, and equality has to be together. If we can get those 2 bits right, then I think that window of opportunity can be seized and climbed through brilliantly. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dominic, very much. Paul Pullman, you have the final word.
Well, I would only say, Andrew, that if we blow this opportunity, which would be very sad, because if we do that, we put ourselves on an unsustainable path we cannot get out anymore. I think COVID is our last warning, but we also have to be mindful that it's not going to be easy. Our governance is broken, and this is why the GEF is so important right now. The global cooperation is probably at its lowest point that I'm aware of, and obviously what we already start to see is still a too big a percentage of these rescue funds are going to a brown recovery versus a green recovery. So I would call myself a prisoner of hope, because I think that there are some bright signs that we can attach ourselves on to drive these tipping points. The first one is the economics. We've waited so long that the cost of not acting is going to be higher, or is already higher than the cost of acting. Spending $10 trillion on COVID just to stabilize an economy and not really solving anything yet, and having to spend probably the same amount again to move it forward, is a warning sign of the highest order. And the good thing is we can now attach values to these risks. And that's why we see business getting involved. That's why we see the financial markets getting involved. And I'm very hopeful of that. The other thing is that habit change happens after about 3 months. It doesn't happen after 1 week. The fact that we were all in lockdown for 3 months gives you a habit change with the citizens, the employees of companies. And it is surprisingly pleasant to see how the demands are stepping up so that the CEOs drive faster, be it in greening, be it in a new social contract, be it in taking care of our natural boundaries. This is the moment for us. So with all of that, I'm a prisoner of hope, but time is against us. As Benjamin Franklin said, you may delay, but time will not, and lost time will never be found again. So we are in this crucial moment now of hope that we need to push through. And that is why the Global Environmental Fund is probably even more important now than when you started, Naoko, 8 years ago.
Thank you so much, Paul. So that was an amazing conversation. Thank you all. That was stunning. So all stay there because we're going to have questions just a little bit later. But first, we're going to do something really unusual. We're going to have the current CEO and chair of the Global Environment Facility talk to the incoming chair, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez. And so Naoko is going to, in front of us all, she's going to sort of share the skeletons in the closet, and Carlos is going to ask her, good gracious, I have to take this over? No, they're going to have a really great conversation. And Carlos, welcome. I mean, it is absolutely great to have you in this job. I hope everybody knows who Carlos is. He has been 3 times Minister of Environment and Energy in Costa Rica. During his tenure, the forests in Costa Rica doubled in size. He introduced the most innovative payment for ecosystem services, I think, in the world. He is a global statesman in the field of the global environment. We could not have done any better than this. Really a great gift to the world, I think, Carlos. So thank you very much. I've had the privilege of seeing Carlos up front as he's been co-chair of the NDC partnership. Started small, it now has what, 120 country government members and another 40 or 50 international organizations supporting it, all with the goal of raising ambition on NDCs. It couldn't have done that without you, Carlos. So you two get together, assume we're not here, just have a nice chat together. Over to you, Naoko.
Yeah, thank you so much, and Andrew and panelists, and for this great introduction to this conversation with Carlos. In fact, as Dominic mentioned, I was so excited and to see that that Carlos gets elected as my successor. To be absolutely honest, I'm so honored to be succeeded by you, Carlos, because it actually demonstrates that now the GEF it become a commodity to attract a person like you. So that I'm excited, I'm honored, and I would say I'm the happiest outgoing CEO and to be succeeded by a person like you. And if I also may share a little bit of the secret between us, actually it's Carlos it's you who taught me about nature, the wonder of the nature. We went around that rainforest of the Costa Rica for 3 days in my very early days. And then you were around the time, but you were not the government, but you really taught me on the ground by experience and how the nature works. So I'm really, really thankful for you. You of course don't need any kind of advice from me, but I just want to share with you a bit of my unfinished agenda and how I hope that you could take it and to take this GEF to the next level. I think we also talk a little bit about it already several times, but then I have 3 things, but then maybe I just want to start with the first one and to let you share your view. And this is the visibility of the GEF. That Carlos already told me and told the GEF Council that the GEF is known to this small, confined, cozy environmental circle, but GEF is not known to the outside world, not known to the finance and the business and the investment. So how we could really raise the visibility of the GEF. why that is important, it was important to me, is that when we really try to do the system change, we can't really do the system change on our own, that just talking to the environmental ministers. We really need to find a way to position ourselves to the leverage point of the system change. Then that the visibility of the GEF become extremely important. So my first unfinished agenda, as we could talk a little bit about, is how we can, and you can now, that raise the visibility of the GEF. And I know that you are so big on this nature agenda, and the COVID-19 actually the show presented us that an unprecedented opportunity to put the nature in the front and center of the conversation with the green recovery. But for this agenda, again, that how we can relate with the other people, our influencers outside the environment becomes so important. So I just would like to invite you, Carlos, that we already talked a little bit about it, how you could take on this my unfinished agenda going forward. Carlos.
Thank you, Naoko, and thank you, Andrew, Johan, Isabella, Dominica, Paul, Vera, Agnes, and everybody that are joining us. I'm really honored by having the possibility to participate in this kind of best wishes of farewell to Naoko after her 8 very productive years at the head of the GEF. I remember very well when I met you in a very informal gathering in DC in 2012, where I was, as a conservationist, I was very curious of having a person from the finance world at the head of our beloved GEF. Very, very curious. And I remember having a conversation with you about rainforest conservation, and you told me, I want to go to Costa Rica one of these days and learn from what Costa Rica has done and learn about rainforest conservation. And I said, anytime. Later that night, I thought that you were great, brilliant, and very polite for offering yourself to visit Costa Rica. But to my surprise, a month later, I received an email from you telling me that you were coming down to Costa Rica and joined me to a field trip in the rainforest. And I remember very well that you came down here and we spent 3 very productive days in the rainforest, where we had a huge exchange. And it was really interesting to me how you were bringing your expertise and knowledge on economics and finance and connecting the dots within what the GEF has done historically on focusing on the focal areas, where you were already connecting the dots that we need to be able to address at the largest scale our investment and be able to, through impact projects, address the drivers of environmental degradation. And that was, very, very enlightening for me. And you talk about your first visit up to Costa Rica, but then you came a year later back once more to Costa Rica. And I remember that you asked me to go for a hike, and you hike Chirripó National Park, the highest peak in Costa Rica, 4,000 meters. Not everybody can hike that, do that hike. You need to have a lot of mental and physical endurance. You proved to me that your determination is one of your biggest assets. And well, that was our first contact and relationship. And your determination has been seen throughout the 8 years that you have been at the head of the GEF, because the big change that you have been able to generate has been the fact that you've been moving the agency to focus on the drivers or root causes of environmental degradation, not just on the consequences. And this is great because GEF went from concentrated investment on effect into the drivers. And I think that has been the most strategic move that you have led within the organization. But now going to your question, Naoko, I think that despite the progress made, the global environmental community and the GEF must continue to make, despite the progress, the GEF continues to make only incremental change against exponential problems. And this is the big challenge. And this is kind of the understanding that we need to have, that despite progress, we continue to make only incremental change against exponential problems. In this framework, we need to be able to generate a political dialogue, not just within our very own GEF partnership, but with the larger development community, to be able to play a key role in what Andrew and Dominic were talking, and even Paul were talking about, the economic reset. And I see the economic reset as, you know, a way by which we can go into this new normality, where we can be able to recognize that the global economic system, which has gave us so much benefit in terms of social development and economic development, hasn't been able to do two things. One is being socially equitable and inclusive, and the other, they need to recognize that there are planetary boundaries. So in order to continue being the GEF a partner of choice and a trusted partner, we need to be able to fit into the political discussions of this new normality and this reset, because there's a broad general understanding that we cannot go back to business as usual, and that we need to understand how do we move from this unsustainable way of production and consumption into something very different, going from the take, make, and throw away kind of system into a circular economy. And it's up to us to be able to provide the ideas and proposals to the major decision makers on how they do that. And definitely upscaling the profile of the GEF is critical, and that cannot be done if we don't prove our effectiveness in how we do our investment and begin generating political dialogues that goes beyond our traditional sectors, and being able to really generate data around the economic benefit of nature conservation in terms of the new reset are some of the most important challenges ahead of us. I would like to finalize this first intervention by saying now, and to everybody that hears us, that me as the incoming CEO, I see myself as a part of a relay race where I'm taking the baton out of you, and I continue the wonderful work that the partnership led by yourself has done in terms to upscale and amplify. $4 billion every 4 years as a replenishment is not enough to really fulfill the expectations and the mandate that we have in our GEF partnership. And even though, and we're beginning the replenishment process next year, and it's going to be very complex, and there are, and the world is in a crossroad. And if we take the right path, that means that the GEF will have a main role as a global agent of change.
Thank you, Carlos. It really sounds, I really feel so assured or reassured that the GEF will move up to the next phase, the next level with your leadership. Maybe I will have, I hope we do have a few more minutes to go to one more question. I know you are really the big on this nature, and then you are the one who really does understand how nature and the economy works. And we are all trying to seize this opportunity of the COVID-19, then how we can really do things differently, because it's not the first time that people talking about nature is important. And I have seen a lot of reports saying that nature has this amount of dollar value, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the investors, consumers, or the finance ministers can actually make their decision based on that kind of notional value. What would be your idea or our idea to make sure that when those influencers, the business, the consumer, investors, and actually the ministers, when they take the decision, how we can ensure that they are able to make the decision built on the real value of the nature. It's not just a nice and good words and but something impactful. I've been really trying to do it, but it's such a hard work. So that's something I would like to hear from you, because that you have been talking about the importance of the green recovery, how we can do things differently this time. So back to you, Carlos.
Thank you, Naoko. Well, that's an excellent question. Nature provides us, our civilization with 40% of the global GDP, and we invest in nature conservation 0.16% of global GDP. So the task is very clear. This is on one side. On the other side, we invest probably 200% more resources in activities that contribute to climate change and the loss of biodiversity to what we invest in nature conservation. So here we got a kind of a very clear challenge on how we redesign our economic system and our political system in a way that goes from perverse a system that generates all kind of perverse incentives into positive ones. And a little bit, this is what we have done in Costa Rica in terms of biodiversity and forest conservation. We went from perverse incentives in the 1960s and 70s, where owning forests was taxed, where you didn't have any credit or financial incentive if you keep your land with forest because it was perceived as unproductive land. And we went from there all the way to put a tax on carbon and design a payment for environmental services to owners of forests where they are being paid for that positive externality. That really helped in Costa Rica at the same time that we redesign our institutional system. We can mobilize resources for nature conservation like never before, that if we don't work in two areas, we will fail in terms of the scale. One is dealing with institutional failures. In most of our governments, we have organized the government on sectors and they work on silos. Costa Rica, again, is probably a good example. You recognize me as the Minister of Environment, but I'm also the Minister of Mining, Energy, Water, and the Oceans. In Costa Rica, we don't divide the public institutional infrastructure within renewable and non-renewable natural resources, which today is generating this huge political confrontation of political agendas, particularly within the non-renewable natural resources and the renewable natural resources. Being able to redesign that is key, is a key element. But probably the most important element, which are the basic enabling conditions, and something that Paul brought into this conversation, is that innovations that are needed for the new normality or the resets is an effort that requires big investments in institutions and good governance. When I talk about the institution and good governance, I'm talking about the rule of law. I'm talking about transparency and accountability. I'm talking about the ease of doing business, the respect to private property, democratic governments, impartial courts, public credit, consumer regulation, welfare state, intellectual property rights, free press, and free education. These enabling conditions for us as a civilization to do for the leap forward are areas that we always undermine from the environmental sector. And these are the key enabling conditions that are put on the line. The good governance and the democratic systems are being right now put on the line, not just because of the populism that is happening in many countries, but also because of the social unrest, because the economic model hasn't generated opportunities to many people, particularly many people at the middle class level in many of our societies. So being able to understand that the GF is investing in nature conservation for the well-being of these people, the people, we need to understand that we should be able to contribute from our sector in improving the good governance criteria in all the recipient countries that we work with.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I think I got the notice that we are running out of time. Yeah, I saw Rosina. But thank you, Carlos. That it's such a reassurance that that Jeff will really fly so high under your leadership. So thank you so much. So Rosina, back to you.
Okay, I really hate to interrupt this fabulous exchange between the happiest outgoing CEO and the still happy incoming CEO. And there are, as Andrew said, lots of congratulations to both of you. So I won't repeat any of those. But there are also lots of comments about this particular moment in time, which of course is shaped by COVID. You know, everyone talks about how we have to flatten that curve, but we also have to flatten the curve on greenhouse gas emissions, on land degradation, on biodiversity loss. So first on the COVID, to both Carlos Manuel and Naoko, the COVID pandemic has impacted all of our lives. Can you say a few words about how it affects the environment and how the Jeff currently is dealing with it and how the Jeff will deal with it? So I think that ties together our happy outgoing and our happy incoming CEOs. I'll let you go first, Naoko.
All right, so as I briefly mentioned, the root cause of the COVID-19 is basically, in my view, it's a collision between human economic system and the natural system, because that our unplanned actually that and not regulated urbanization brought us so close to the nature, and also this rampant deforestation pushed by the food system, the food production also that sent us to so close to the nature, which then we disturbed that the integrity of the ecosystem. So with that understanding, I think we have been doing two things. The one is to really accelerate that the transformation, and we already have several good projects and the program at our hand, and food and land use system program, the deforestation program, the urbanization program. So how we can actually that integrate or strengthen some of those the components which will ensure that this to really understand this connectivity between the human system and the nature, and how we can ensure that we will not really disturb that the ecosystem anymore. But also we are doing that and establish that the task force among experts and ecologists, epidemiologists, and others to really understand the root cause of that the COVID-19. And I know Rosina is a part of this task force. You can jump in and say a few words about it, and to make sure that we will not repeat the same similar crisis going forward. So these are maybe two things that going forward we are doing. Now back to you, Carlos, but we will do more.
Thank you. Thank you, Naoko, and thank you, Rosina, for your question. Well, people need to understand that in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are all nations aiming for a peak and able to balance up things and, you know, deal with that problem. Climate change and the biodiversity collapse, there are no peaks. There are points of no return. And we got 10 years in front of us to be able to move this oil tanker, sustainable production consumption, oil tanker course into the right path. That is why the next 10 years is key on how we mobilize resources and be able to be in the center of the global economic reset as a GF partnership. And that is kind of very clear. Definitely the pandemic is the byproduct of this human nature confrontation. It is evident and we need to really address that in a comprehensive, holistic manner. And what the GF does in terms of dealing with land restoration and deforestation is, but we're not having any impact at the scale that we need it. There is no other organization that is having an impact at the level that we need. We need to protect 4 billion hectares of forests in the tropics, in the northern and southern latitudes, and we need to restore 4 billion hectares of degraded landscapes. just to be in track with the 1.5 in climate change and be able to revert the loss of biodiversity and make us, at the same time, more resilient to climate change and more resilient to future pandemics. So I tend to believe very strongly that if forest conservation and landscape restoration is not a good economic business for a small indigenous community, the small farmer as the big corporation, we will never achieve it because we will have the market and the price against us. This is why it is key, tremendously important, that parties within the UNFCCC Climate Convention finally agree on Article 6 that will give us the enabling political condition for countries at the national and countries at the multilateral level agree on a global carbon market, in particular interest on the forest carbon market. Today, we don't have a global carbon market, and what we have is a very weak, voluntary-based carbon system that pays for $5–7 a ton of carbon. That doesn't match the cost of opportunity of doing cattle ranching or unsustainable agriculture in those tropical landscapes. We need to really understand the market failure, address that market failures through clear national policies, but most importantly, we need to have a global carbon market mechanism that is fair and recognizing not just the positive externalities, but also the co-benefits of keeping those forests. The co-benefits are very important in terms of human well-being, in terms of biodiversity conservation.
Yes, wonderful. And co-benefits are often things that are not quantified. You know, there's a saying that we should never waste a crisis, and maybe the COVID crisis is allowing us this weird lens to look at the time for transformation in the environment. This next question will give the two of you a break for a minute, but I would ask Paul and Dominique to turn on their cameras because it's directed at them. And it actually builds on all of the conversation we've had so far. And the question is, can you speak to Jeff's integration with the private sector and with cities? And do you see these playing a larger role in the future? So maybe Paul, you'll go first and we'll turn it to Dominique second.
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think frankly that is the only option. The challenges that we have in front of us are of such magnitude that nobody can do it alone. And the beauty with the Jeff is that you have put cities in there, you have put deforestation in there, natural landscape protection in there, energy transition. So it's a holistic solution that you want. You mentioned in the beginning of this talk probably the social inequality that this crisis has shown, and the need to create jobs. We are coming out of this crisis with what the ILO thinks could be 150 million more people out of jobs and significantly more back into poverty. So if we don't create the jobs, especially for the young people, if we don't invest in a direction that gives you more resilience, that gives you a higher return for your money, and that obviously leads to the green economy. But it cannot be done alone. Governments have settled themselves with such levels of debt that they might take a higher part in the global economy, might take equity stakes, might have opportunities to put green conditions on these transactions, but that's only a small part of what is needed. So if we don't get the private sector at scale behind it, we will not get to this tipping point that Naoko is advocating for. So absolutely important to do that. And cities, which after all is 70% plus of the carbon emission, to include that as one of the key focus areas of the GEF is certainly needed, but also applaudable.
Thank you very much. And Dominique, if you have a short response.
Yes, thank you. Just to build on Paul's points, couldn't agree more with what he said. There's also another way of looking at this, and I mentioned it slightly before, but with the kind of official development assistance under pressure because of the impact of COVID and those 0.7% decreasing relative to global national income, there won't be as much money in the system. And yet, as Carlos was saying, the scale of the challenge is exponential and incremental activities won't do. So imagine the role of the private sector, and particularly those larger companies which are shifting to a net zero commitment by 2050 or sooner, and the component of that whereby as they transfer to net zero, where they'll be looking to put nature-based solution finance into the system to allow that to happen, which may indeed be outside of an Article 6 agenda, but a flow of finance which is actually quite significant, of the right kind of price per ton through some kind of LIBOR rate, which can go absolutely into the restoration, not only of the ecosystem, but into livelihoods, jobs, and all of those things that Paul was talking about, particularly for poorer countries who are going to be more hit by COVID and will have less fiscal headroom to spend on some of the essential ecosystem services that they need. Now, that will not happen without that partnership between the public and the private to make that work. But that is the sort of exciting role, I think, that the GEF and other great organizations in the space can play, if our imagination can cope with the scale of the challenge that we need to fix in the short time frame that we have, based on what Johan and other scientists are telling us we need to do very, very quickly.
Speaking of the tyranny of time, we are just about out of it, and I'm very sorry for that. We are trying to answer some of your questions literally online, and we can answer some later. But I guess I want to turn it back in a minute to Andrew to close us, and I'm, again, sorry we can't get to more questions. You know, your image of the relay race, Carlos Manuel, I think all of us who know Naoko know she can run marathons, and we know you're very happy at high altitudes. So we know that the GEF leadership has endurance, for which we are exceedingly grateful. And, you know, although you and Naoko have both lamented that we have not yet achieved the transformational change we seek, you know, I just want to remind you that a firm foundation is needed to build a great and enduring edifice. And in the last 8 years, Naoko, you have put that foundation in place to achieve transformational change. So the world owes you a great debt of gratitude, and we welcome you, Carlos Manuel. With that, I turn you back over to Andrew for his final benediction.
Well, that was a wonderful conversation. Thanks very much. I was hoping we'd have a lot of disagreement, but actually it seems pretty unanimous. Carlos, you get a big vote of support. Every single person on the screen and all 650 that were online want to help you as you move forward. So we are at your disposal. Naoko, you were called dogged, determined, narrative changing, tipping point crossing, irresistible, inspiring, transformational. And those were just some of the adjectives. I didn't hear any disagreement on that. I want everybody to know that Naoko is going away, but she's actually not going away. She's going to Tokyo, where she's going to be a distinguished professor, and the University of Tokyo is setting up an entire center called the Center for the Global Commons. So she, from her standpoint in Asia, will have a transformational role there. So please keep in touch with her. One thing that didn't come through as much as I think it should is the fact that the GEF has also now, it is driving the agenda more than it was. In the early days of the GEF, it was successful, but the implementing agencies tended to sort of, you know, flex their muscles more. And I think what Naoko's done with her excellent team is really to shift that. And I would like to thank the team that Naoko has. You're inheriting a great team, Carlos. I'm sure they're on the line, Gustavo and Francois and Robbie and Esther and Malvika and all the others. Thank you. I mean, we've enjoyed working with all of you, and especially with you, Naoko. It's been wonderful also to spend time with your husband, Toshi, and get to know you all. And we look forward to a continuing relationship. Thank you to Paul Pullman, to Isabel Teixeira, Vera Songway, Johan Rockström, Dominic Worre, Agnes, and obviously the head of the Science and Technology. What does STAT stand for? Science and Technology Advisory.
Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel.
Which is what Rosina is. So wonderful to be with you, Naoko. We love you. We love what you've done, and we love what you will do. So with that, we are dismissed. Open your microphones and a round of applause.
Thank you. Such a special moment, and then Carlos, please take on and then bring that Jeff to the next level. Thank you so much, everyone. This panel,
Wonderful.
this group is really my souvenir to you. It's a great team, and that's something I can leave it for you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Naoko.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, bye-bye.